We start with Arizona's presidential preference election on Tuesday, what most of us call the presidential primary. There's no suspense surrounding the winners. President Biden and former President Donald Trump have amassed enough delegates to claim their respective parties' nominations. But the state primaries will go on through June. Arizona voter turnout for the primary so far is low, 30% as of late last week. That according to Sam Almy at Uplift Campaigns. But that might serve as a low-impact stress test for elections officials who've dealt with enormous stress over the last 4 years. This is the first of 3 statewide elections over the next 8 months, and the first statewide vote for Democratic Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, the state's chief elections officer. Welcome back to Square Off.
Thanks for having me.
What about the idea that this is a big test for our elections officers? We've seen high turnover there in virtually 2/3 of Arizona's counties. How significant is this primary despite the low turnout and the low stakes?
Well, I think it's significant, but it is something that is just part of normal cycles for Arizona's elections. You know, a lot of people don't really start paying attention to elections till about 30 or 60 days out. Our election cycles run for about 720-day cycles. That means we're planning 2 years ahead for just about everything. So is this a test? It is a test, and I think the elections officials across Arizona are not just prepared, but they're doing very well so far.
So you think they are ready for what's going to happen on Tuesday? A lot of mail-in ballots already in, but you think they're ready for when voters actually show up on Tuesday?
I think we're going to be as ready as we can be. We're going to do our level best, given the resources that are deployed to elections officials. You know, elections are the only part of national critical infrastructure that are not sustainably funded by the federal government. And the state funding could be a lot healthier to make sure that all of those folks out there can actually get the job done well. So given the resources that these elections officials across Arizona have, I think they're going to do pretty well.
And to be clear, at your first statewide election, you did run Maricopa County elections. Yep. When you were county recorder. What kind of coaching up has your office had to do with the 15 counties?
Well, really coaching up isn't really the right space, right? Coaching into it is really what I like to talk about, because a lot of the folks that were already there that are coming into these higher spaces where we've had losses in chief election officials, they were already there. Most of these people do have some experience running elections, and there is a small community of them across the state who are working very well together, including a lot of the folks on our team at the state. The Secretary of State's office has the best election administration team that we've seen in Arizona in a couple of generations. I'm really proud of them, and I'm real proud of the work that they're doing across Arizona.
Before every election, this is my 10th cycle as a reporter. Don't have to run them, thank goodness. But before every election, I alert our staff, something's going to go wrong.
Sure.
And that's been the case in virtually all 10 of the elections. Should people just expect that? And also, much will be made of it.
Well, that's the difference, right? There's always going to be some quirk. There's always some little thing that happens because this is a human endeavor. Human beings do this. And a lot of times it's not because somebody did something wrong. It's because somebody else misunderstood something, and it kind of plays itself out. 9 times out of 10, that has always just been the case. Now we have people who are taking political advantage for nefarious reasons over some of these minor issues that always have happened. And so that's where we are. That's the big problem that we've got. There are folks out there who are, some of them are actually grifting and making money in nonprofit organizations on both sides of the political aisle, people who are taking advantage of some of these typical little, nooks and crannies of issues that might be happening. There is no.
But do you acknowledge some have been atypical? The printer problem in 2022.
Well, there have always been these sorts of issues, right? And there has always been a backup for these issues. For example, the printer problem wasn't actually a problem. That actually showed us how hard it is to counterfeit ballots, even ballots that are geared up exactly for those same tabulators in the same system with the most minor of issues. It can be, though, exploited in the rhetorical space. So this was not a real issue. There was backup for it. The voters could always vote, and they always had their vote counted. The problem is those folks who were acting in bad faith exploited it, and they turned it into a quote-unquote problem. What it did was it highlighted the redundancies and the safeties in our system, and it highlighted the fact that we're going to make sure everybody's vote counts. And I think the idea that we call this a problem instead of an opportunity to highlight and showcase the good work that we do, that to me is an issue.
The security and safety of election workers has been high on your agenda, if not right at the top. In a January interview with Rolling Stone magazine, you said Attorney General Merrick Garland and the U.S. Justice Department should be treating threats against election workers and administrators as domestic terrorism. Why do you call it domestic terrorism?
Well, the legal definition of terrorism is a threat of violence or violence to achieve a political end. This is what is happening. Our election workers are being threatened with violence, or in some cases, they're actually being followed around. They're actually being accosted to meet a political end. That's the very definition of domestic terrorism. Why should I call it something other than what it is?
What do you want Merrick Garland and perhaps President Joe Biden to do that they haven't done yet?
Well, one of the things that we want to make sure that we distinguish is the executive office of president is different than the Department of Justice. We don't want a politician involved in the Department of Justice's ideas and their work. Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice have actually stepped up what we've been asking them to do. They're promoting the prosecutions that they are engaged in now. They're pushing harder to investigate better a lot of these threats that have been happening. I've spoken directly with the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and other federal law enforcement officials to make sure that we see the work that they're doing so that it can act as a deterrent. And just the other day, we saw a heavy sentence get handed down, and that has been promoted.
3.5 years for somebody who threatened to blow up the office you're now sitting in.
Yeah, which is appropriate. And that is a clear message that we need to be sending. Because we have to understand as Americans, not all speech is protected. We know this. But threatening speech has penalties, especially when you're trying to undermine the very democracy that guarantees that you have free speech.
So you were pretty critical of Merrick Garland in that interview. It sounds like you're generally satisfied right now with the DOJ's approach.
Well, the DOJ's approach has shifted a little bit, and I'm really glad about that. Look, everybody has to be held accountable, including me as a public official. Sometimes criticism will get us the kick in the rear that we need. Maybe that's what made things move a little bit. If it is, good. I'm glad for the elections officials and elections workers who now hopefully will get more protection because we've got a better deterrence out there against these threats.
There's a new player this year in the disinformation business, artificial intelligence. You've talked about the seminar you were part of, I think back in January, I think it was.
Late last year.
Late last year, what you learned about artificial intelligence and how it could affect and just truly disrupt our election. What was your takeaway from that session?
Well, the takeaway was really clear. Generative artificial intelligence can have great benefits for our society. It's an incredibly powerful tool. But equally, it can have some detriment, specifically when it comes to spreading and disinformation. What we now know is that generative artificial intelligence is an amplifier to the same old lies. It's a spreader, a much more quick spreader of the same old conspiracy theories. It's not a new weapon, it's an amplified weapon. And we're hoping that folks will focus in on getting their information from trusted sources, from their local election officials at the county levels in Arizona, from Arizona.vote at our website at the Secretary of State's office, and from depended, truthful sources, instead of just going out there willy-nilly and trusting just about anybody, because that's where the lies spread, that's where the conspiracies spread, and that's the problem.
And to be clear, AI can make an image of you saying things you never said, and it will look like you, and you could say something about the election that could be, or that AI.
During that training, we had law enforcement folks and our trainers create a deep fake of me and another election official here in Arizona so that we could make our folks aware of what it looks like and then start working through how it is that we're going to deal with it if and when that does happen.
As Secretary of State, will you steer clear of any campaigning this year, any endorsements of any candidates?
No, there are certain candidates that I have already endorsed, particularly in races that I will not be certifying. I think that it's an essential part of my role as a citizen. I have the capacity to do that, but I'm an adult, and I also know that when I get solid results from all of the counties, whether or not I like the outcome, I'm going to certify those elections. You in this country can be a good sport, and you can lose, even if it's your preferred candidate. That's okay. And we have to be able to teach that lesson to folks, particularly our children. right? You don't win every contest. I won't win every contest. We already know that. My friends and political allies won't win every contest. But if we make ourselves so completely devoid of our own humanity and our own ability to reflect that good behavior and to stand on our values, then we're not really serving well. So there are some candidates that I will be endorsing. I will shy away from that in races that I have to certify.
Such as president.
Such as president.
Okay, but you don't think you should be above it all as the person who runs or oversees our state elections?
Well, here's the thing. I'm going to vote, and I have my opinions. And I think it's disingenuous for me not to be able to express at least some opinion. Look, I'm a Democrat. I'm a proud Democrat. But that doesn't mean if a Republican wins, I'm going to deny them some process. It doesn't mean that if a political opponent, if one of my friends wins, that I'm going to cheat for them. That's not how this works. And if we can't stand up with solid values and show that character as an example of the way that we can win and we can lose with grace and dignity, then we're not doing America the way America was intended.
And if Donald Trump wins the presidential vote in Arizona, will you certify?
Of course I will. If that's what the law requires and that's what the results are, then that's what my job requires. I took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the state of Arizona and the United States, and I will do that.
Adrian Fontes, thanks so much for joining us. Best of luck on Tuesday.
Thanks so much.